What's up, guys? It's Dwayne back again for another video, back in for a reaction, and today's a great, wonderful, beautiful day because it's a German day. Why Germans don't buy houses? Without further ado, let's get into this reaction. Let's go.
I'm a German who has been living in the US for a little over 5 years now, and last year I even bought a house here. Something that I definitely wouldn't have done if I had stayed in Germany. Why, you ask? Here's the answer.
So she wouldn't have bought a house if she stayed in Germany.
Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016. And as I just mentioned in the intro, I even bought a house here last fall, which makes me the first one out of all of my German friends to do that, and probably even the first one who has even thought about it. Here in the
I feel that because, like, in England, it's the same. Like, no one's buying houses at the moment.
US, however, I have plenty of friends my age who own their own home. I feel like it's quite normal here to buy a house, even at a younger age, and pay off the mortgage instead of paying rent. And in a lot of cases, people just sell their houses again after a few years and move somewhere else, or simply upgrade to something nicer. Germany, on the other hand, is known as a nation of renters. I know that this comes as quite a surprise to most people, but more than half of all Germans actually live in a rented place, and only about 45% of Germans live in a place that they or someone else in the household own.
Okay.
Now, the reason why this is so surprising is that Germany is the country with the biggest economy in Europe and one of the biggest ones in the world. So naturally, you would think that a wealthy...
You would think it's a wealthy nation, you guys would be you'd all own your own homes, but obviously not.
Country like this has plenty of people that own their own real estate. But the truth is, Germany actually ranks among the last places in the developed world when it comes to home ownership rate.
Wow. Wow. Well, we're quite high up. So maybe more people in England than I thought own their own home than in Germany. I know in Ireland, I have a few friends from Ireland, and they own their own homes. It's very common in Ireland to own your own home. Interesting.
Rates. Out of all European countries, only Switzerland has a lower rate than us. These numbers are a little bit older. Most of these countries don't release new numbers regularly, but it really hasn't changed all that much. Germany is still in that same rank today, so it's a helpful graphic to visualize the differences. But how does this make sense? How does a wealthy country like Germany have a lower homeownership rate than poorer countries such as Spain, Greece, or Mexico? Let's talk about it.
That's true.
So of course, it's not like no German in the entire country owns a house. The title of this video is obviously somewhat of an exaggeration. I personally grew up in a residential...
I'm sure there are some homeowners. I mean, who's renting out the properties for people to stay in? So obviously there must be some home ownership somewhere.
Neighborhood in Munich where most people did own their homes. Granted, the majority of those houses were row houses or duplexes with a rather small yard where only a thin fence is dividing you from your neighbor's patio and yard, but even that is already a pretty big luxury in a large German city like Munich, because we generally don't have as much space as people do here in the US, where it's standard to have a standalone house with a front yard, backyard, and your own garage or driveway.
America's crazy, right? Like, they've just got space for days. If you buy a house, you have land, like proper land. Like, they just, yeah.
If you want to hear more about how German and American houses are different, you can check out this video, by the way. It's linked up here. But we're going to stick with home ownership versus renting today. And in Munich, which is one of the most densely populated and expensive cities in Germany, you'd have to pay a fortune to get something like what I just described as standard in the US. Even buying a 2-bedroom apartment in Munich costs more than a 5-bedroom house here in Cincinnati. But that's just...
Wow. Wow.
It's a side note because that's not actually the reason for the low home ownership rate in Germany. And of course, Munich and Cincinnati are two cities that you can't really compare price-wise.
You can't, because Munich is like a big major city. Cincinnati is not a major city in the United States. And I'm pretty sure in Germany there'll be places like towns and small places that are like a little smaller where the house prices are cheaper. Just like in England, there's cheaper places than London by far. But people are still not buying in Germany. So there must be another reason for that. So let's find out.
wise. It's just a little glimpse into my personal reality when looking at where I'm from and where I live now and what I can afford here. But first, let's look at the facts. As I just said, the majority of all Germans live in a rental property, and that applies especially to younger and older people. According to this survey by the Deutsche Bundesbank from 2017, it's about 85% of the 25 to 34-year-olds who rent their home, 71% of the 35 to 44-year-olds, and 52% of those over 75. So,
well, I'm in this bracket. I'm so happy I'm still in this bracket. I'm on the end of this bracket, but I'm in this bracket. 85% rent in Germany. Wow.
the highest homeowner rates are among the people between 45 and 74. In that age group, the homeowner rate is at 54 to 60%, so more than half of all people in that age group do own their own home, and only 40 to 46% are renters. Over the last 10 years, the homeownership rate in Germany has only slightly increased, by the way. The homeownership rate also varies within Germany and is different from state to state, with the highest rate of about 65% in the Saarland and the lowest rate of 17% in Berlin. What's interesting is that overall, there are fewer homeowners in the so-called new states of Germany, Neue Bundesländer, so in former East Germany, than in West German states, which seems to be a remnant from the GDR. About 90% of all rental units in Germany are located in multi-family homes. That's a very common type of building that you'll see all over the country, in historical districts, in newly built neighborhoods, in the city centers, and in the suburbs. Eastern Germany is even known for a specific type of multifamily building called Plattenbau. Those buildings consist of prefabricated concrete sheets, Platten, and were mainly used to build quick and cheap housing after World War II, but you'll find these buildings in other parts of Germany as well.
Okay.
Now let's get to the reasons as to why the home ownership rate in Germany is so low. I did mention that real estate prices in Munich are extremely high, so you might think, well, duh, houses are just a lot more expensive in Germany than in other countries, so fewer people can afford buying a house. But actually, even though in some cities, such as Munich, but also Hamburg or Frankfurt, real estate prices are indeed very high, the average house in Germany only costs around 320,000 euros. Or at least that's the only number that I could find for a nationwide average, because... So
that's not that high. It's like, it's quite similar to the UK, but you guys, like, that survey that she put up showed that you guys really don't purchase your own homes. So what's the reason? She's stretching this out. I really want to know what the reason is why you guys don't purchase homes.
Because the prices are usually listed per city and not for the entire country. And according to this article by the German news outlet Focus, when you compare the average price for 1 square meter of real estate to the average household income in Germany, the rate is actually very similar to other countries. So an average household in Germany could purchase about 4 square meters of real estate with their yearly net income. That's actually the 5th best rate in the European Union. In many other countries, the average household can afford way less than that. Yet they do own more real estate than Germans, and one reason for that is that you don't necessarily have to purchase a home to own it. You can also inherit it. And that's something that just doesn't take place quite as much in Germany. About half of all German homeowners are currently paying off a mortgage, which indicates that they bought the house themselves. While in Romania, the country with the highest homeownership rate in the world, only about 1% of owners pay off a mortgage. Why is that? Well, there simply isn't quite as much to inherit in Germany, which, of course, has historical reasons. About 20% of all German housing stock was destroyed during World War II, about 2.3 million homes. An additional 2 million were damaged, and including the refugees from the Eastern occupation zone, about 21 million people needed a home. So in the first few years after the war, West Germany needed to come up with a plan to provide a lot of housing, about 5.5 million homes to be exact, as quickly as possible. And they had to do it in the midst of a broken economy, with the currency being...
Wow, yeah. I didn't even think about the World War, so that's basically why a lot of you rent rather than owning a home, because homes that would have been passed down from generation to generation got destroyed. That's really sad, actually.
being virtually worthless, and a population who didn't have a lot of financial means. The best way to solve the situation was to build government-subsidized social housing in the form of apartment units that people could rent for a reasonable price.
Right.
The first housing program started right after the end of the war, when there wasn't even an official state and government in place yet, but shortly after the Federal Republic of Germany was officially founded in 1949, the government did also pass the first housing law, Wohnungsbaugesetz, with the goal of having as many people as possible benefit from this. The government ended up funding about 3.3 million homes. 2.7 million were built by private investors that were given access to subsidies, low interest rates, and tax breaks. And so Germany managed to cut the housing shortage in half by 1956. And due to the fact that there wasn't really a high demand for private real estate at the time because of the financial situation, banks were hardly giving out loans, and multifamily homes could house more people. Most of those newly built homes were rentals. The foundation for Germany's preference to rent was laid. Other countries that were affected by the war, such as the United Kingdom, for example, actually had similar strategies after the war. Still, today, the home ownership rate in the UK is significantly higher, with about 65%. In 2004, it was up even more. So the big question is, why did the Germans stick with renting, even...
Yeah, because, social housing was huge. Even more so back in the day in the United Kingdom, and it's slowly changing, and I feel like more people are getting on the housing ladder. But yeah, Germany, you guys have stuck to renting. I guess, you don't have to buy a house. I mean, there's other ways to people buy houses for different reasons. Some people buy houses because they need the space and they want to have a home that they own and that they're not paying rent to somebody, and they're basically, it's an investment. But there's other ways to have investments, right? You could just invest in stocks or something, in companies or whatever. And maybe that's what Germans prefer. What do you guys prefer? What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below if the reason why you don't own a home is because you're not too bothered about ownership in terms of a house, and maybe you invest in other things. Let me know in the comment section.
Even after the economy recovered and the country experienced the so-called Wirtschaftswunder in the 1950s. One of the answers seems to lie in how much money was put into rentals. Since the UK mainly targeted their housing programs at public and non-profit institutions, excluding the private sector, and kept up renting and construction cost caps for public housing developers, most rental property was of significantly lower quality than privately owned homes because landlords had to cut back in maintenance. As a result, rentals in the UK, especially those that were largely publicly funded, acquired somewhat of a stigma. In Germany, on the other hand, rental regulations were reduced much.
The housing that is like rented, the public housing is quite low quality. It's not great. So there's an incentive to not live in one of those homes
much sooner, in the early 1960s, and the policies were more balanced between the private and the public sector, so that rental housing has stayed of relatively high quality in Germany and is oftentimes nicer than privately owned places in countries like Croatia, Slovakia, or Romania. Which goes to show that owning your own home doesn't always necessarily equal a better housing quality, and German renters seem to be very happy. According to a 2007 survey by the OECD, more than 93% of Germans said that they were satisfied with their current housing situation. One factor that probably contributes to that satisfaction is that there are a lot of regulations in place to protect tenants in Germany. This includes rent caps that limit rent increases to no more than 20% over a 3-year period. In some cities, it's even 15%.
I wish we had a rental cap, like in London. My God. After the pandemic, the way they hiked the rents, the rental costs went through the roof.
Cities with a particularly tight housing market, we also have a so-called rent price brake since 2015, a rent control, Mietpreisbremse, that keeps landlords from raising rents unreasonably above the local rent index, Mietspiegel. And it turns out that rents in Germany are actually cheaper than in many other countries. A one-bedroom apartment in Germany costs about 700 euros a month on average.
Did she say a one-bedroom apartment costs 700 euros? Say that again. I'm shocked. How much?
A one-bedroom apartment in Germany costs about 700 euros a month on average. It's obviously
That is so cheap, guys. Rent in the UK is through the roof. You wouldn't get a one-bedroom apartment. Well, maybe in the north part of England, in a small town somewhere, maybe you get a one-bedroom apartment for 700. But you push to find one under £1,000, under £1,000. What?
It's obviously going to be more expensive.
Well, €700 is like how much is that? That's like £600 or something. Oh my god, that's cheap.
In a city like Munich, well, the nationwide average
cheap.
here in the US for a one-bedroom apartment is at $1,100. In addition to that,
It's more
leases
like
are
UK.
usually unlimited in Germany, unlike in the US where a standard lease ends after 1 year, and
Same as the UK, 1 year.
terminating a lease in Germany comes with quite a few rules, especially on the landlord's end. Both parties usually have to give a 3-month notice, unless the lease agreement says otherwise.
3 months.
And if tenants have lived in the place for over 5 years, the landlord even has to notify them 6 or even 9 months before. Also, landlords can't terminate a lease without having a good reason. That can include the tenant being late with their payments, of course, but also when the landlord needs the place to live in it themselves or for family. That's called Eigenbedarf. They do have to show evidence of this need though, and they can't terminate the lease when they want to sell the place. So landlords are often pretty restricted when wanting to end a lease and often have to overcome a lot of obstacles, which means that tenants don't have to worry about just being kicked out at any given time. And that provides a lot of extra security.
So your rental is a lot more secure. Ours is not as secure. You can get some terrible landlords in the UK. Terrible landlords. And that's the reason why I probably would like to own a home very soon, because yeah, our rentals are not good. The tenant is not treated as fairly as they should be in the UK. Termination of contracts, they can do that quicker. They can up the rent. They can hike the rent up. Like, they can do a lot of things. They have a lot of power in the UK. And the quality of rentals are not very good. A lot of landlords don't even like maintain properties to a high standard. So you don't want to live in a rental. You just don't.
Now, besides all of the upsides of renting in Germany, the German government also just doesn't provide as many incentives to buy your own home as other countries do. Even though there is a homeowner program, the KfW Wohneigentumsprogramm, that gives people who want to buy or build their own home access to low interest loans, it doesn't seem to be enough for people to buy more real estate and even out the lag in tax breaks. Because unlike other countries, Germany doesn't allow you to deduct your mortgage interest payments from your taxes, unless you rent the place out instead of living in it yourself, which then again encourages the renters market more. Also, German banks are generally a little more conservative when giving out mortgages and often require a 20% down payment, while in the UK, you usually only need 5 or 10%, and in the US, you can get a mortgage with a down payment as low as 3%, or in some cases even 0. At the end of the day, this just keeps the threshold of entering the real estate market a little higher than in other countries, and especially excludes people with a lower income. What's also pretty high by international standards are the transaction costs for home purchases in Germany, which makes buying a home and especially frequent moves less attractive. Last but not least, as this article points out, the low homeownership rate in Germany probably also goes back to mentality differences. In most countries, owning your own property is a life goal for many people with a pretty high priority. George W. Bush promised his voters to make the US a homeowner society, for example, and when Brits say things like, "My home is my castle," you can tell that they idealize the idea of owning their own home as well. Meanwhile,
Yeah, absolutely. In the UK, British people, owning your own home is just seen as a rite of passage. I own my own house. You know, a lot of people on Instagram take pictures with the keys outside the house, with the house in the background. It's just kind of seen as being an adult, like growing up. If it's not if that culture's not there, that pressure, that peer pressure's not there in Germany, then I can understand why you guys don't feel the need to purchase a house. A lot of people in the UK purchase houses, even though they might not even want to buy a house, or they might not need to buy a house, but they purchase a house just for the status, just for the way people see them as a homeowner. Does that make sense? Yeah, so there is a culture of buying homes in the UK.
meanwhile, in Germany, the average home ownership rate is around 30%. And that's just for a 2-bedroom. If you want to buy a house, you need to pay 50% down payment, and then you have to pay 30%
like America.
Meanwhile, according to the article and my personal experience, most Germans are a little more hesitant when it comes to buying real estate and taking out loans. And with the good renter conditions in the country, renting just seems like a very responsible and reasonable thing to do. And that actually lines up perfectly with my personal experience. I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but I feel like buying a house in Germany is just considered a much bigger step than it is here in the US. It's more like this intimidating adult thing that younger people honestly don't really talk about a lot, even in your 20s, because it's not really a realistic option for most of us. It's something that's way down the road or might never be reality for us. Now, of course, I grew up in a big, expensive city. This is definitely a little bit different in rural areas. But I think it's safe to say that buying a house is just a big decision and a big step for Germans. And I experienced the different reactions when I bought my house last year. While most of my American friends were simply excited for me, many of my German friends looked at it as this huge milestone and couldn't even believe that I was able to do this and how easy the process was here.
Right, okay. Well, I think there's a separation in England with the capital city of London, because in London, the majority of people don't own their own homes. In the rest of England, people own their own homes. So it will be seen as a huge thing if you're a Londoner and if you bought a house in London, people will be like, what? How are you able to do that? But she lives in Cincinnati, which is probably the equivalent of a town in a rural area of Germany or England. So that's why she's able to.
Americans really make this whole house purchasing process seem like the most casual everyday activity. My realtor even told me that she never had a client that asked as many questions as I did, even though from a German perspective I really just did what everyone who's about to make a big decision like this should do. But she said that most of her clients usually just want her to handle everything and don't really care to understand all of the details themselves. And the signing of the final purchasing contract took me like 15 minutes. In Germany, I know from my parents that usually takes over an hour because they'll read the entire contract to you. Here, they just summarized the contract for me and had me sign the different pages. I also feel like even for Germans who could technically afford it, buying a house isn't even on the table usually until they're sure that they want to stay at that place for a long time, and until then, they rent.
Absolutely, because that's what buying a house is as well. It's like you're laying roots. You're laying roots in the area or the place that you live, and it kind of stops you from, it can stop you from traveling and doing things that you would like to do. Having a home is a responsibility, and when you purchase one, there's maintenance, there's insurance, there's water bills, gas bills, there's all these things that you need to worry about. Security of your home when you're away, but when you don't have a property, you're able to go anywhere you want in the world and rent. And I think that's the reason probably why I haven't purchased a property yet, because it's like the freedom that you have when you're not tied down to a place. Let me know in the comment section if you feel the same way.
They rent. You wouldn't really buy a house in Germany when you already know that you're going to move again in a few years. Buying a house is something much more permanent to us. In general, Germans only move 4 to 5 times in their lives, while Americans move more than 11 times on average. With the yearly leases here in the US.
To be fair, I've moved a lot in my lifetime. That's because we don't have these lifetime leases that you guys have. Our rentals are just normally a year, 2 years at max.
Especially younger people often choose to move every year instead of extending their lease, and even for families it's normal to move every now and then, and as I said earlier, just sell your house and buy a new one. So to answer the question of the video, the reasons as to why Germany has a lower home ownership rate than most other developed countries in the world are a combination of the country's history and rebuilding process after World War II, the high quality of rental housing, relatively low rents, the high renters protection, low incentives for homeowners, and probably a little bit of our mentality.
I get it.
If you want to read more about this topic, I linked all of my sources and articles that I used for my research in the info box below. Now I would like to hear your experiences with the topic. What is this like in your country? Do people prefer to rent or own? Is there a
So interesting. Yeah, this is a very, very interesting video. I didn't know that you had a culture of renting in Germany. If I didn't watch this video, I would never have known that. And I get it now. I completely get it. With the culture of after the war, losing all those houses, all the public housing being available to you, which is of high quality, the renter's protection, all that she listed just then makes absolute sense, because in the UK, it's very much, the rest of the UK is like very much, they push you to purchase your own home. They give you incentives to purchase your own home. So there's a difference in that. I don't think it's a bad thing that you rent though. I really don't. Like I said, you have a lot of freedom to do what you want to do and move wherever you want to move. And yeah, if you don't want to own a home, there's other ways to invest in your future. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. Until the next one, I will see you very soon.